Okay, part 3. We're going to start with number 9. What terrible racist movie, KKK recruiting movie, was shown at the White House and by which president? And it was Birth of a Nation. We already talked about that. Woodrow Wilson, Birth of a Nation was shown. Terrible, terrible, terrible. What was he thinking? All right. Number 10. Did the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 give Black Americans the right to vote? Why or why not? No. When were they given the right to vote? After the Civil War, the 13th Amendment, right to vote. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry, 15th Amendment, blacks' right to vote. I'm so sorry. I got it mixed up. 15th Amendment, okay? Yeah, so 15th Amendment already gave them the right to vote. Years and years earlier, we had to go back. Remember, the Democrats got in office, and they swept all the blacks out of office, and they repealed all 23 Civil Rights Acts. And so that's why. So when we had to do the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act to give Black Americans, just to kind of reissue, you can't move polling places, you can't give literacy tests, all that kind of stuff. All right, now I want to talk about something called Iceland and Greenland. I don't know if y'all know this, but Iceland is green and Greenland is icy. And why do they name those things that way? They name those things that way because they wanted people to go to Greenland, which was icy, and they didn't want people to go to Iceland, which was green. They kind of wanted to keep people out because it was beautiful and it was green. But by naming them Iceland and Greenland, you get the opposite impression, right? Well, that is why when it's called the Civil Rights Act of 1964, to somebody who's uninformed, I love how Rush calls them uninformed voters. To someone who's uninformed, they think, well, that's when we got our civil rights, but that's not true. It's just not true. It's with the 15th Amendment. And the Voting Rights Act of 65, same thing. It sounds, well, voting rights, okay? No, that was to eliminate all the discrimination that was going in the Democrat and Southern states. All the states that were controlled by Democrats, mostly Southern states. So anyway, just to review, since I confused you a minute ago, the 13th Amendment ended slavery. The 14th Amendment said all freed slaves are a citizen in your state. The 15th Amendment gave blacks right to vote. Okay, 13th, 14th, 15th. 13th, what is it again? Freed slaves. 14th, citizen in every state. If you're free, you're automatically a citizen if you live in that state. 15th, right to vote. Pretty much when your teacher gets confused, we need to go over it. Okay? So sorry about that. And I told you about Iceland and Greenland just so you know. Sometimes when things are called things, like sometimes if someone wants to push a bill, they might call it the Child Welfare Act. It really has very little to do with that. And I know there is a Child Welfare Act, but they will name it something that if you vote against it, when they go to the public and say, he voted against the Child Welfare Act, it sounds terrible, but they don't really know that the act really would not help children. You understand? And I don't know about the Child Welfare Act. I'm just using that as an example. But they'll name it something on purpose to try to pressure people to vote for it. Otherwise, they'll go to the public, he voted against this. How could you? Okay? Number 11, explain why the Constitution is an anti-slavery document according to Frederick Douglass's writing. And it's worth 15 points. So I don't expect you guys to put a few words down. Okay, I'm really going to mark you off. I've been kind of lenient, but I'll mark you off if you don't do it. All right, and we talked about this. Frederick Douglass, he was a black man, and he was very well known, and he worked with an abolitionist and a white man. He worked under a white man, and the abolitionist, and I think it might be on the notes I handed you guys, the abolitionist said, oh, our Constitution is so pro-slavery, and how could these founding fathers do this, and da-da-da, and they were fighting against slavery, and he just didn't know the facts. So he trained Frederick Douglass to think that way. And so Frederick Douglass gave some speeches, and in his early writings, if you look, he says the same thing, because that's kind of how he was taught, and he thought, well, this man knows, Well, they asked him to kind of be the person that goes around and talks about slavery. And he was such a courageous man, an honest man, an honorable man, and a godly man. And so what he did is he said, well, okay, well, if I'm going to say that about the Constitution, I better read it. So he pulled out the Constitution and he read it. And, of course, we know it's only really one page. I mean, it's amazing. We all don't know it by heart. It really is amazing. It's such an amazing document. Anyway, so I'm sorry. I said it was a concept. I was talking about the Declaration of Independence. It's only one page. Sorry. Constitution's more than one page, but it's not very big. You know, we got those little booklets. So anyway, so he reads through the Constitution and he says, this is not an anti-slavery or a pro-slavery document at all. This is an anti-slavery document. So he was just convinced. He said, nowhere in there is the word slave. And people point to the 3/5 clause and say, well, that's why it's pro-slavery, da-da-da. But that is the opposite of why it's pro-slavery. And we talked about the 3/5 clause was talking about property. And Democrats and people that wanted slavery wanted to use actually the slaves that they owned to get more votes to keep those slaves in slavery. Because they wanted votes. They wanted to count up all the slaves as well as themselves and get more representation in Congress, in the House of Representatives. And that would have given them more votes to continue slavery. So the slaves themselves would be giving the property owners more rights to continue slavery, and it doesn't make sense. So after going back and forth, they compromise on 3/5 of the slaves would be counted to go into the House, you know, because we do the House of Representatives population. And that's how it was actually to reduce slavery, not to continue slavery. Just about all of the founding fathers hated slavery, and this was an agreement from the very beginning. But to get the South involved in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, they couldn't actually end slavery like they wanted to. And remember, as soon as the Declaration of Independence came out, way back, okay? As soon as the Declaration of Independence came out, because King George would always veto us when we tried to end slavery, a ton of states just like that ended slavery. They didn't want slavery all along, but King George kept vetoing them. So as soon as the Declaration of Independence came out, the states ended slavery because we had, you know, states had a lot of control. So it wasn't a pro-slavery document at all. Well, Frederick Douglass found this out. And that's in his later writings, he talks, it is very anti-slavery. Founding fathers do not want slavery. So don't believe that either when people tell you that. Don't believe it. It's a lie, okay? All right, so I just wanted to make sure that's clear. Let's see. Why the Constitution is an anti-slavery document according to Frederick Douglass's writings. And you want to mention several of those things. You want to talk about the 3/5 clause and what that meant, and the fact that there was no mention that they were slaves or slave anywhere in there, you know, when you're explaining that. In this sheet that I gave you, first 7 black Americans elected to the Congress, who was the first black Speaker of the House is in there in the 1800s. So you want to look that up and put it down. And number 13, who made up the members of the KKK? What types of offices in government do they hold in the Democratic Party? And they held all kinds of offices. They were on the Supreme Court. They were senators. They were congressmen. Sad to say, I told you about the president who showed that movie. They were police. They were judges. There were lots of people in authority and in power. And it's just sad to say. But they all made up members of the KKK. There were very famous congressmen and senators that were part of the KKK. All right. And then there were people who were Democrats who were starting to get elected after the 15th Amendment and later on in the 60s, and they couldn't get elected without the endorsement of the KKK. So even up, you know, into the 60s, if you didn't have the endorsement of the KKK, you couldn't get elected. And there was Mal Ferguson, and there's some other ones that tried without the endorsement, and they couldn't get elected. I think Mal Ferguson ended up getting elected, but it was very hard, very difficult. And there were some other people that just didn't, and then they had to get the endorsement, and then they could get elected. So much of the Democratic Party was part of that. All right, so as we're learning about these men, this sheet, first 7 black Americans, I want you guys to read over that and be familiar with their names. There's only 7 of them. We went over them in class, I think. Yeah. And I made a mistake on this Robert Brown Elliott, number 7. This says, well-educated reading in Spanish, French, and English. It wasn't. It was like Spanish, French, and there's one more, maybe Latin or something like that. It wasn't English. He obviously already spoke English. Led passage of civil rights bills. And right here, Joseph Hayne Rainey served as the first black Speaker of the House, the U.S. House of Representatives, okay? So in the 1800s, many black men held office, were in Congress, they were judges, and when that Dred Scott rule came down, they were judges, they were holding office, they were property owners, and all of that went away, and there was this uproar, and Southerners could come to the North and capture black people, and a lot of times freed black people and take them to the South and make them slaves. So it was just a horrendous time in our in our history. All right, I'll have 2 more sections going over stuff and reviewing probably tomorrow. I'll probably do them in the next few minutes, but these 3 are just for today for what you need to learn for your sheets to come to class. Make sure you guys, you have the Supreme Court that I asked you guys to print out and put whether they're conservative, liberal, or swing vote. There's one swing voter, guy that's considered a swing voter, and he has a famous name. That's my hint. So I just want you guys to write that, and I want that under the picture section of your notebook so that you have that, or art. It might even say art, but we didn't have a lot of artwork this semester. Like last semester, we had artwork of different things. So, all right, y'all have a great week. See you later. Bye-bye.